Hello, amateurs, and welcome to another episode of Hot Topics, where I'm looking at this tactical series here during the Rugby World Cup. And I've got Tom Hicks with me again today. Tom, how are you?
I'm really well, Tim. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Very welcome. Now, then, we are going through a very emotive subject in this episode, and that's the kicking of rugby players, and specifically, certainly it seems at the elite level, why they kick so much. So, Tom, why do teams kick at all?
Because kicking essentially is like a cheat code for rugby. If you are in your own half and you haven't generated a line break or you've not managed to find an edge and you're overplaying in your own half, the fact that you can essentially kick it maybe 70, 80 meters back down the pitch is such a weapon. I think, and it also can heap the pressure back on the opposition. Suddenly they're inside their 22. Suddenly they might then have a line out. Well, actually, now with the 50-22, you can get a line out in their 22 just by kicking it from your half into it. There's so many attacking opportunities that come from it. I think the major contention is teams that kick positively and teams that kick negatively. Teams that kick positively as a attacking strategy, as a key component of their attacking strategy, are the teams that you see getting the most change from it. Teams that kick out of a kind of panic or just relieve pressure, get out of it, I can't deal with it anymore. That's when it starts to become a little bit aimless. And I think that's why people then start getting a little bit frustrated with it.
Yeah. Now, you said something there that I'd like to pick up on and use the phrase overplaying. What kind of things might you see if a team is overplaying within their own half, for example?
So you'll see things like, Ireland, South Africa on Sunday, whenever it was, the one of the penalties that Faf missed just came from them. They lost their structure. And I think Caelan Doris was essentially a one-out runner. They passed it out from the ruck, hit Caelan Doris, and he went into a ruck and ended up getting done for holding on. It was in that kind of grey area. It was just inside the South African half, so the appetite for risk is a little bit higher because it's a 52-meter kick. Teams that do that maybe inside their own half, they're the teams that start to put themselves under a lot of pressure and start seeing the scoreboard going up in threes because they get done for not resourcing the ball effectively and giving the ball away. And essentially that can then lead to, 3-point penalties or suddenly you're defending a line out on your own 5-meter line.
Okay. Now then, let's talk about the different types of kicks because there are a lot in rugby. Give me some examples of the types of kicks we'll see and maybe the reasons for them.
So you'll see a lot of kicking from ball in hand, essentially. And the two major ways of doing that, obviously, is off one pass or two pass. So your 10 kicks or your 13 or 12 kicks, particularly Elliot Daly, if he's playing at 13, will kick it a lot. Or you'll see kicks off 9. And what they're trying to do in those situations with the kick off 9 is, generally speaking, unless you're really deep in your 22, what they're trying to do is force an error. So ball goes up and you've got 3 people clustered around it. There's going to be potentially a knock on, or someone gets done in for being tackled in the air. There's loads of opportunities there for things to go wrong, and that can then give you a platform to then march yourself back up the pitch. What you'll see with kicking out of hand in terms of 10 and 12 or 13 or 15, when the ball's in your possession, so you maybe come off a scrum and then you kicked it, they're basically looking for a better attacking opportunity, or they're looking to turn the defense and start putting them under pressure. And you get that, what you call a net gain. So if you kick it on your 10, it bounces in their 22, you've got a good kick chase, and their fullback is then under pressure and they kick it out on their 22, you've then made that 40-yard gain. In terms of meters made over, that's another stat that teams look at, is how many meters did we make cumulatively throughout the game. And generally teams that make the most meters, either through kick or through ball in hand, generally they're the teams that come out on top.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, there's also another sort of benefit to this as well, particularly in terms of like chip kicking, I guess, is that it can slow up a defensive line. If a defensive line is flying up to make a lot of tackles, then suddenly if they're aware that there's a threat, the ball might go over their head, it might slow them up a bit. Is that something we're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you saw one of the Wales tries when I think against Australia, when they chipped it in behind. The Australians just hadn't resourced the backfield at all. The back three weren't operating as a unit, and there was a huge amount of space in the middle. And that really clever little kick in behind just opens them up completely. Again, you're getting into a space that you probably wouldn't get into with ball in hand. But you've kicked to compete and you've kicked sensibly, and the team have gone through and you've been able to capitalize on it. If you start having those kind of dimensions to your attack, teams, it's very difficult to defend against a team that has an intelligent, proactive, competitive kicking strategy, because you don't really know what they're going to do, particularly then teams that kick off 9 and 10 and 13 and 15. They're the teams that can really start to cause a lot of questions, cause a lot of problems, because it's very difficult to plan what they're going to do. You know, there's moments when no phase looks the same. They'll do something completely different each time, using the kick or using an offload or using a shape of 9 or shape of 10. It's very difficult to try and get on the offensive when you're on the defensive side of the ball, when a team has got that much variety.
Yeah, and I think this is actually one of the biggest points when it comes to you know, supporters shouting "Don't kick it" and all this kind of stuff. Is that a lot of teams only use the same type of kicks. They use the box kick or the sort of like the crossfield bomb. And if you're seeing like
Mm.
20 of those each a game, that can feel very boring. Whereas other teams that use, I know I'm thinking of New Zealand here in particular, they use a lot of different types of kicks. And that feels, I don't know, it just feels more exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I think from the kind of the entertainment aspect of it, teams that kick to compete, you know, the shorter kicks, or the kicks where you're looking to try and get the ball back immediately, i.e., creating a transition like we spoke about recently. What you're looking there is it generally is more exciting, because it's more competitive. It's happening in the moment. When you look at it, when you kind of zoom out, as it were, on a team's kicking strategy, particularly, you know, England or Wales, you look at how they're kicking and what they're trying to achieve. And a lot of the time, when you string it all together as one project, as the kicking game, rather than just one kick in isolation, you'll start to see some really interesting aspects in what they're doing. And one area you can look at it is teams when they decide, they'll have that kind of kick tennis, you know, from basically from the baseline, almost from the 22 to the 10. We're on our 10, they're in their 22, and we're kicking it over the net to the baseline. What's really interesting is when then teams decide to play a drop shot, when teams then decide to go for the up and under and make it competitive. You know, teams, a lot of commentators will sort of say, "Oh, you know, thank God for that." What they're doing then is you look at how they're marching themselves up the pitch. You look at where the forwards are on the halfway line, and you're kicking from your 10 into their 22. Forwards are marching up and marching up and marching up. If you can then suddenly get a moment when you're then up and undering it from near your forwards, you've actually made, like we said earlier, like a net gain. You've actually marched yourself up the pitch 15, 20 meters, and you're then putting a competitive kick in. Suddenly, from going from attacking on your 10, you're now attacking near their 10-meter line. That's a much more appetizing place to go and attack from. And that's why teams kick regularly, and you see those kind of kick tennis rallies. It's teams trying to manufacture an attacking opportunity that's more appetizing to them. And what that leads into is what we spoke about recently as well, is that unstructured possession source. Generally speaking, when you get the ball unstructured, it's chaotic. You can't plan for it. But if you can have a good kicking strategy, and you can plan for kicking into the corner, you know that player, who may be right-footed or left-footed, is going to be exiting from in the corner of their 22. It's pretty obvious where the kick's going to go. They're probably going to kick it down the line, which means you can get set up with players ready to go and attack a ball where you know it's going to catch, where you know you're going to catch it from. And I think with the camera angles that you have now, where they just follow the ball around, if you zoom out and you see a player kick it into the corner, you'll see three of them, or two of them at least, will then go and get set on the touchline, ready to receive the kick. And that's why Lee Halfpenny in the 2013 Lions, going way back, why he was so good under the high ball and so good on the kick return, is because he was manipulating where the players were going to return him the kick. And you're basically then bringing structure to the unstructured possession source through that macro kicking strategy. Yeah.
So I guess it's really difficult for people watching on TV as opposed to watching in the ground to appreciate that kick tennis and all the subtleties that going on around it.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it can get dull. You know, I'm not gonna lie, it can be dull. I think the best thing to do is like I said in the podcast before, was don't watch the ball. So if Farrell kicks it, don't watch the ball go into the opposition 22. Watch what he does. Watch how he sets up for the return. Watch what Stewart does. Watch what Arundel does. Watch what they're doing in the backfield, because that gives you a better insight into what they're trying to achieve. Because you'll see Farrell move maybe into the 15-meter challenge, and they might have. I mean, a couple of years ago they had like Ellis Genge in the backfield, so that he could catch it and give it to Genge, and he could just smash it up. You look at how many steps that Farrell or Stewart or someone has to take on a catch. Generally speaking, there's not that many steps, because they know roughly where they're going to be returned the ball, because they've got an intelligent kicking strategy. So if you're in the stadium, or if you can get a camera angle that shows it on a sort of pitch scale, don't watch the ball. Watch what they're doing in the backfield. Watch how they're setting up. that'll give you a better insight into what they're trying to achieve and how they're going to go about doing it.
Okay, so we've talked there about real sort of good kicking strategy. Again, another thing that I think maybe frustrates or annoys people is the idea that teams are just chipping it back to the opposition because they'd rather not have the ball than have it. And I've certainly seen a few times that's happened in this World Cup where it's not because of the kicking strategy. They haven't set up this ideal position to kick from. It's just been like, oh, what do we do now? I'd rather you have it than we have it. How do you
Yeah.
feel about that?
I think what's really interesting is if you look at, I think it was the 2019 Six Nations, and someone rugby knows out there will probably call me out on it in the wrong year, but 2019 Six Nations, there was an inverse correlation between the amount of phases per try scored and where that team finished in the table. So teams that had the most phases per try scored finished lower down the table, is what we're saying. So essentially, there was a correlation between teams that played with the ball more and where they finished on the table, i.e., lower. What's really interesting is then, as a coach, you look at that statistic and think, okay, there's correlation there. Is that a causal correlation? Does one cause the other? Is one a direct result of the other? Or are they just happening? Are they simultaneous variables? Are they just happening at the same time? When you look at it like that, and you look at the fact that Italy, I think even the highest phases in 2019 was like 5, I think, or 4.8 phases per try score. It's not a lot. And then it went down to kind of 2.8 with France and England, and they finished kind of first and second and third. Whatever. With that, you look at teams who in 4 or 5 years ago, it was all about transition. It was all about, if you don't score in 4 phases, kick it, try it again in a minute, because it was going on that school of thought of, when a team is transitioning from attack to defense, that's when we're going to score. And if we're allowed to get into their defensive shape, we're not going to score. So kick it back to them. Teams like Ireland, like South Africa, New Zealand, and France, you'll see now having more ball in hand time, a lot of it, giving themselves more opportunities to score off multi-phase. Teams like England still kind of go down that route of, if we haven't scored in 4 phases, let's just kick it. But with that said, I think the England-Japan game, our ball in hand time was 18 minutes, which is actually pretty good. It's like 22% of the actual game time was us holding onto the ball. Whether that's because we were playing Japan, and no disrespect to Japan, but I think we probably wouldn't play that much if we're playing against a South Africa or an Ireland. But you are seeing teams now be have a bit of more appetite to go and play with the ball in hand. But certainly 4 or 5 years ago, it was, if we haven't scored in 4 phases, kick it. There's still a whiff of that around this World Cup for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you sort of mentioned there about the opposition. That's one of the factors, I guess, in terms of how teams would individually approach this. How often or how much? What's the variation, would you say, in how teams approach this side of the game, depending on who they're playing?
I think massively. Yeah, I think. A good example is probably 2017 Lions tour to New Zealand, when I think it was second test, when it was just, the ball was so wet, and Lions in New Zealand is a must-win game, and the weather was biblical. Terrible rain. That's when you'll see teams kick it a lot. And because I'm a proper boring person, I've watched that 2017 Lions documentary a lot, and there's a couple of really good insights into it, where Farrell says to Gatland at halftime, he's like, "Look, I know the kicking game's going to be massive, but let's not tell them to kick absolutely everything." And that just gives you an insight into what coaches at that level are looking at in terms of the context of the game, the weather, how you're going to go and win a game. In 2017 through to kind of 2020, it was, if you haven't scored in 4 phases, kick it. I think teams potentially, when they're playing, when we played Chile, our ball in hand time, I haven't seen the stat, but I imagine it's probably a lot higher than it would have been against Argentina. Again, Japan, 22% of the game is us on the ball. It's quite high. I think if you ask most rugby fans how many minutes did England have the ball in hand for in that game or across the World Cup, they wouldn't say 18 minutes. They would say, 8 minutes or something. So there is definitely an appetite change depending on who you're playing, what the weather conditions are, and the context of the game, whether it's a knockout game or whether it's Chile in the group stages.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, there's one type of kick, I guess, that we haven't particularly spoken about yet, and that's the kick to score. So I guess you'll see this in a couple of different ways: the kind of the crossfield bomb, or the kind of the, like, once you've got to an edge, like the chip through. talk to me about these choices. Why are teams doing this, and how successful are they?
I mean, a really good example of that would probably be Georgia against Fiji in the last minute when they got an edge and they were through, and then the winger kind of kicked it in behind, and there was a grubber chase, and the Fijians they won the race and kicked it dead. I can't remember who was commentating, but a couple of the comments were, "Why did he kick it? Why did he kick it?" And you look at the probability on a freeze frame of him scoring from that position with a ball in hand on a crux moment of the game where the clock's red and you need to score a try to win this game. The option there, the kicking is the best option for sure. I think once you get to that edge, but you're going to be pushed out, or you're going to have a ruck where it's going to be probably under resourced because you've made 20 yards on the edge, and your nearest person is your outside centre, and that's it. And maybe you've got the fullback, the winger, and a covering nine potentially that are going to attack you. That ruck's going to be really a real challenge for you. In those environments, you're capitalizing on a try equivalent, which is a line break, with something else that does often lead to tries as well, which is kicks to grass that find grass inside 22. So you're basically compounding variables. You're compounding moments of the game that do lead to tries. So in those moments, I think it's a fair thing to do when you've not got a better option. But I think if you do make a line break now, you'll see teams, generally speaking, like Ireland, will then capitalize it with ball in hand rather than kicking it away. So there's different schools of thought. I think ultimately fans want to see more ball in hand time. Teams ultimately want to win, and I think the ones that find the happy medium of playing an exciting brand of rugby that's also supported by statistics that they're going to, they're performing behaviours that are likely to lead to scores. They're the teams that are going to go far.
Yeah, that Georgia one was a great example actually, because my initial reaction was, I guess, the same as a lot of people, like why kick it? But then I stopped myself immediately because I was like, hang on a second, let's properly analyze this. And I started thinking about a lot of the things that you just said, and it like they were unlucky. The bounce of the ball was just went sort of straight on, didn't it? I think they had like three chases to Fiji's one going back, so any kind of deviation on that ball, and it was a good kick as well. To be fair, he nailed it exactly where it
Brilliant.
should have gone. Yeah.
Yeah, a brilliant kick under immense pressure, and like you say, one bounce of the ball that goes left or right. I mean, if you look at, I was watching the clip from France versus England 2007 semi-final when Lucy scored in the first minute. The bloke, he's under the ball. The French, I can't remember who it was, and the ball just kicks up and just lands straight in Lucy's hands, and Lucy just falls. You think one bounce of the ball is gonna determine whether that's a good kick or if that's a bad kick. That kick for Georgia, if that bounced off to the right and landed straight in Georgian's hand and they scored under the post, we wouldn't be having the conversation of was that a good opportunity to kick or not. You'd be having the conversation of what a brilliant kick, unbelievable. So the margins are very fine between fans going, "Oh fuck's sake," and fans going, "That was fantastic."
100%. So I guess as we sort of bring this one to a close, what's kind of would you be your final message? Let's do it directly to supporters watching the Rugby World Cup when the kicking game's going on. What's the kind of sort of final message we want to give?
My final message would be: remember that there is a plan in place. They're not doing it for lack of a better idea. Well, I mean, we'll give them benefit of the doubt. We'll say there is a plan in place. They're not doing it for lack of a better idea. And try and join up the dots. Try and join the kicks together and look at it and think, okay, of the 4 or 5 kicks they've just performed in this rally, what have they done on the fifth one? What have they done on the sixth one? Then also look at what the players are doing off the ball, because that's going to give you the better insight into what they're doing. And with that in mind, you can then start getting a better understanding of what teams are trying to achieve. So give them the benefit of the doubt. There is a plan in place, and don't watch the ball so much. Look at what they're doing off the ball and how they're going to try and manipulate each other. Because when you do that, that age-old expression of it's a game of chess is, there's no better example of a rugby being like chess than the kick battle. It's two teams trying to manipulate each other, trying to move themselves into different positions, trying to get their weapons in play, and it all comes through that kick return rally.
Yeah, fabulous. I mean, definitely in the stadiums at this Rugby World Cup, I've heard a lot of frustration around kicking. And even though I do understand a lot of this, I feel a little bit of frustration too sometimes. So I'm not going to pretend that I don't. But hopefully, this will sort of aid some understanding across the board, and then yeah, people will just get more enjoyment from the kicking phases, I guess.
I think so, yeah. And don't get me wrong, mate. I'm the same. You know, I'll sit there and I'll try and have a strategic mind on. But if I'm in the pub or I'm with my mates watching it, I want to see some entertainment. I'm not. If I'm not sitting there with my coach's hat on, I want to see someone take it 20 yards, step, fend, offload, and score on a kick, score on a run return. I don't want to see them kick it 15 times. But when you sit back and maybe watch it again on YouTube or something, that's when you can start getting a bit more understanding. But certainly, mate, I'm with you. With sometimes you are a bit like, okay, right, here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, people listening at home, ask to what do you think about this? Has this sort of like enlightened you a little bit? Is it stuff you already knew? I'd love to hear in the comments down below. Let me and Tom know what you think. And while you're down there, give it a thumbs up if you don't mind, and hit subscribe, because I'm out here during the Rugby World Cup doing daily vlogs and taking you in the stadiums and the bars and the fan villages and having a good time, basically. So it just leaves me to say, Tom, thanks very much for this series. You've been fantastic.
Oh, cheers, Tim. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for having me on, mate.
No worries at all. And for you, those at home, get out and play.